In response to requests from Amiga users around the country, Sweet Pea Productions presents Todd Rundgren's comments about the making of his exciting Change Myself music video using the Amiga computer and the video toaster. As a service to the video and Amiga graphics community, we present Mr. Rundgren's comments, blunt and unedited, as he made them to the Los Angeles SIGGRAPH members at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California. Following Mr. Rundgren's address to LA SIGGRAPH, several Amiga video graphics professionals asked us for an opportunity to reply to what they feel are factual errors in Mr. Rundgren's comments, and to share ideas with you, the user, about how to avoid the problems he encountered. See the information card following this presentation to order your video copy of, Todd, Amiga Pros Respond to Rundgren's Adventures in Amiga Land. And now, Todd Rundgren speaks.
Thank you. I guess there may still be a few people who haven't seen the video that will be the subject of my presentation, so probably first we should run the video once again so everyone can get a point of reference, and then I will go through a painful description of what went into producing it. So that would be the 3/4 inch number, with sound, please. Lights. Since the rest of the presentation will be distinctly less graphical, in other words, it's all talk, I brought along another tape that they can just sort of play in the background, which is that VHS tape, which is, well, I'll tell you afterwards what it is. It's just something to look at. There are some, I'd like to quash some ugly rumors right off the bat. One is the principal one is that through sort of whispering down the lane thing, it is true, yes, Amigas were involved, video toasters were involved. Invariably someone will say, oh, he did that with an Amiga. It required a lot more than an Amiga, and I didn't use most of what the Amiga does, and I don't intend to get into a big sort of detailed thing about what the Amiga is and isn't. It's just that I principally tried to stay within the video toaster world and avoid all forays into the Amiga world, and whenever I did foray, it was usually with unpleasant results. The other, well, I'll explain as we go along what exactly went into this besides a single video toaster and a single Amiga. A little historical background. Without being sort of egotistical, it's unlikely that many people would be able to accomplish this, at least within the time frame that I did, and that's only because of historical background that I have that started initially in video. At first I had a video studio in my house that was principally devoted to video animation and video synthesis, not so much production in the same way that someone would take a camera out and film some things and edit it together into a narrative line. I stuck strictly with musical themes and doing abstract visualizations to go with them. Then in 1979, I had a fortunate occurrence. I came into some money thanks to a gentleman named Meatloaf, and I built a professional broadcast quality studio that was devoted to making it's kind of like forging a synthesis between music and video, and didn't really involve computers very much at that point, at least at the point that I started the studio. So we did a lot of matting and special effects compositing, so I had a fairly comprehensive hands-on experience with special effects and production techniques in general, that particularly in the video area. In addition to that, I had a kind of ongoing dalliance with computers and computer graphics, and that sort of broke out into a rash when we started doing some technology exchanges with New York Institute of Technology, and I came in contact with the paint system that Alvy Smith developed that was running down there, and some of their animation projects, and so I really got hopped up about computers, and I wanted to incorporate some of that technology into my video studio as well. And the first thing I did was, coincident with that event, the Apple II Plus became available, and that was the first machine that you could do any kind of serious programming on. They offered a Pascal system, although I never learned how to program in Pascal, but at least it was available, and I got one of these machines, and I tried to do a mock-up of the paint program that was running at NYIT, and this is how I learned how to program. And it went fairly well as a concept. It was something that hadn't been implemented on PCs before, and it kind of got Apple fired up, so they marketed the program in a short-lived special delivery software edition that they did for a while. They weren't very good at software marketing, as it turned out. Aside from that, the program was written for a graphics tablet, and the graphics tablet failed its FCC emissions tests. So they withdrew it from the market, and it completely mooted the program that I had written. But it did give me a grounding in computer concepts. A few years later, I was out of the video business again. Proved Meatloaf's infusions of capital couldn't keep up with the outflow. So I kind of got out of the video studio business, and I wasn't really that seriously involved with computers either, but as it turned out, PC Magazine, at least the art director of PC Magazine, had convinced them to undertake this artists and computers project, and they were seeding a bunch of artists with various machines and having them create fine art or mediocre art, as the case may be, with the various systems, each according to their specialized discipline. And since I had been involved in video so much and knew about computers, they seeded me with a system to do a video animation. And they obviously were as naive about this as I was, because they gave me one AT, and first they started me off with a West End Films program, and that proved to be inadequate, and then they set me up with the Cubicom system, and that sort of proved to be inadequate as well. Aside from the rendering times being substantial, the design time might be completely, you might spend 3 times the amount of time that it took to compute a frame just designing the frame. So so that didn't work out either, and that idea just went on hold, the idea of doing a video on personal computers, until I went to SIGGRAPH this last year. So I didn't actually go with the intention of doing a computer video. I went, and as it turned out, coincidentally, the Video Toaster was making its big sort of world debut, or at least in terms of the greater computer graphics community. People in the Amiga community knew about it before that. And as a matter of fact, I knew about it just through some personal connection, but I hadn't paid much interest to it till I wandered by the booth of the show. And then I saw the video part of it, and I said, that's great, but I'm not going to get suckered into video again. And then I wandered around the side of the booth there, and there was this 3D demo tape running, you know, some of the capabilities of the 3D system. And then I started to think that maybe here was a solution that didn't exist before. There was this combination of elements: the video part of the equation, the 3D animation and rendering, and all of the elements of the package that were necessary to do what I was originally supposed to do with the PC Magazine project. So I started thinking, And then I decided I would do a little bit more of a feasibility study and then maybe take the leap. Now, I knew it wasn't going to happen off the bat. I knew one Amiga was not going to do it, you know. So if anyone ever thinks that you could do something resembling that, you can't do it with one Amiga. It should be quite obvious by now why everybody's demo reels contains 10-second animations on them. You know, it's because it takes you a good long time just to get that 10 seconds out. So, so that was part of my overall justification for getting involved in the project. The arithmetic suddenly looked a little bit better because I could afford to buy several Amigas, whereas I couldn't afford to buy several 486 machines or several FXs or something like that. So arithmetically it started to look a little better. And then also I had a reasonably long lead time in order to complete it, because I finished the album in August and it wasn't to be released until the end of January, so I had a long time to sort of check out whether it was possible, and also a long time to have a lot of disasters and failures along the way. So then I got into sort of a more earnest feasibility study. The number one thing on the agenda, of course, was how was I going to pay for this, and the record company, as a bit of side information, the record company will usually will give you a budget to make a video, and that budget will be anywhere from, well, maybe if you're some new age kind of headbanging act, they might give you $10,000 and say, go take a Super 8 camera and come back with the results, you know. And they might, if you're Michael Jackson, you might wind up spending $500,000. You know, you just there's a broad range in there. My video was more than 10,000. My budget was more than 10,000 and significantly less than $500,000. It was on the high side of six figures, put it that way. So the first thing I had to do was I had to convince Warner Brothers to allow me to do something that nobody had ever done before, which is to realize a full motion 3D animated video on personal computers. And so I decided the best course of action was not to tell them what I was doing. Just to sort of like give them all kinds of glowing guarantees about what the final product would be like, but not tell them actually what I was going to embark upon to do it, or tell them that this is the first time anybody had done it, because then I figured, well, you know, they might hedge a little bit and give me far less money, or else demand a more conventional approach. So just my assurances were enough to convince them to get the budget, so I got over that part of the feasibility. The second part of it was, would NewTek, the makers of the video toaster, support me, because there were still some missing elements in the equation in terms of software principally, and also in terms of specific support on what was a very new piece of hardware. And NewTek was very positive, and I seemed reassured that they would. The next question was, would I get any help from Commodore? And they seemed willing to help me, but Commodore is so incompetent that it really doesn't matter whether they help you or not. So I did manage to get developer status there, and that probably sped things up a little bit, but at the same time it'd be one of these things where you would call somebody maybe 8 times before they call you back and manage to get a one-on-one, you know, a commitment to send the equipment out or something. And another thing that I thought at least was important in the feasibility study was that I knew other people who had attempted a similar thing. Somebody that I knew actually had done it for the past SIGGRAPH. His name is Gary Yost, and he was the kind of the program supervisor for the new Autodesk 3D product. So he had done a demo in a similar manner for SIGGRAPH and had gone through the same thing. So I wanted to see whether he would, you know, like encourage me to do it, and he discouraged me from doing it. He said that just to plan on doing everything at least twice, and generally just, you know, he said the technology's not proven, you better have a really strong fallback position. I said, yeah, I'll have a real strong fallback position. And I just never developed a fallback position, because I figured if I did, then it would give me a way out of it, you know, the coward's way out. So, and then finally I had to figure out whether it was actually possible, you know, like do a few test renders with the hardware, and, you know, get the renders up to the quality that I wanted to, and then speculate, you know, well, if this is the average render time, will it even be possible to do this, you know, given a certain amount of hardware and a certain amount of rendering time. And I figured that with a lot of slop and leaving the possibility open that I would find myself in a very painful situation, that I could conceivably get it done. So I went ahead and started doing it. The first first couple of months actually, were principally pre-production. That was getting the equipment and the personnel and all this other stuff sort of lined up and doing design work and starting the script and things like that. The first thing I did was I figured I would need like at least a half a dozen computers, 030 machines with a lot of memory and big drives and stuff. So I got 6 Amiga 2500s, and each one of them had its own 335 megabyte hard drive. Because we're talking, if you do the arithmetic, we're talking for a 4-minute video, we're talking 7,200 frames of video. And each one of them occupies on average about 3/4 of a megabyte. So you do the arithmetic, you're talking about several gigabytes of storage. So each Amiga had not only its own 40 megabyte internal drive, it had just kind of its own little private file server. Because one thing I didn't undertake was networking. There was nobody who would encourage me to do that. As a matter of fact, a lot of people said they thought it was possible and they thought there were cards, but they couldn't think of anybody who would ever network Amigas together with any degree of success. And so since I didn't want to be the first example of that as well. So I shied away from that and opted for the manual networking system, which essentially is all the Amigas were stacked up on a table in a couple of stacks, and then the drives were stacked up behind them, and I essentially ran around and around and around the table, plugging SCSI cables in and out, to get the proper, to transfer information from like the main design computer to the other computers. In any case, more about that when we get down to actual rendering. So I got 6 Amiga 2500s. I got the toasters for them. The toasters actually came later, but eventually they did come, and I didn't have to pay for the toasters right off, so that wasn't actually cash out. But if you calculated the street price of the toasters and the machines and the drives to go with them, it might come in somewhere around $5,000 or $6,000, which is a pretty good price for the workstation with all of the graphics software and big storage and stuff like that. So it was looking pretty good so far, at least in terms of equipment expenditures. Then I got into this whole software odyssey. This is when I first discovered what it was like to try and exist in the Amiga world. And I come from the Macintosh world, so I have these grand illusions about user guidelines and things like that, which obviously are a complete afterthought if they're any thought at all in the Amiga world. Because I encountered different interfaces in almost every program that I used. Some programs had incredibly wonderful. Am I boring you? An incredibly wonderful functionality and incredibly awful, like creatively awful interfaces. Sometimes the interfaces were better, but they had this sort of childlike quality about them. And this kind of quaint illogic about them. Like they might be just like a whole screen full of buttons, each of which seem to have an equal value. You could hit any one of them, and they just might do anything. And the exit button is just like right in the middle of them somewhere. Like when it's time to leave the program, you just have to like look at the whole screen until you find it. It's a combination sort of game and application at the same time. So anyway, I had to make up a lot of things that the toaster didn't do in Amiga software. Like, for instance, I needed like standard filing capabilities. I wasn't going to first of all, I wasn't going to iconize every single file. If there are 7,200 files in this, at least 7,200 files in this, in the final production, I'm not going to iconize every single one of them and drag them all around, trying to get them in. Neither am I going to learn how to use a command line interface to perform the same function. So I had to get a program that was called Disk Master. It essentially gave me sort of like list managed, sophisticated selection, a way to move things around. That was sort of like the principal thing that I needed, because backup was a super major consideration in this. I used another program that essentially allowed me to launch things directly just from a little palette of buttons. It was called WMS, and I actually used something similar on the Macintosh because I don't like the Finder. It's too busy for me for the few things that I use all the time. So essentially, that might have been the most time-saving thing of all. I didn't have to go searching through folders and double-clicking on little icons to get things to start up. I could just click on this one button and go directly to the application. I did a little bit of word processing, but the Amiga is not suited to word processing in my mind. The Amiga was originally designed, I believe, as a super-duper sort of combination game machine and computer, and it does really well in the game department, and in order to function as that and be inexpensive, it has that NTSC output. And that's great because it allows you to videotape everything that's on it, but some things are just painful to look at on the screen. For instance, word processing. So I didn't do much, but I had to do a little. I had to do things like modify the startup file and modify other kind of text files every once in a while, and it did perform that function. I had to have disk repair software. In other words, I was doing an entire review of the entire world of Amiga software, as well as trying to do this thing, in order to cover some of the other things. I had to do disk repair, file conversion software, 3D file conversion and 2D file conversion software. I had to go through all the modelers because the modeler in the toaster has some limitations that cause everything to look like flying logos. So I had to do a whole review of all the available modelers for the Amiga. Some auto tracing, use a little auto tracing, a little fractal terrain generation, and some things just for aesthetic things because I got so depressed looking at the Amiga screen sometimes that I bought some, I think I downloaded some public domain thing that was supposed to make the Amiga look like 2.0 without actually being 2.0, and it just, the look was a little bit more pleasant, so I used that. And there was something like a speed up that allowed you to use the processor cache, and this kind of like dumbfounded me, that the machine actually could run faster. Why did you have to actually go out and find this thing to make the machine run faster, and install it on every machine? Why isn't it just in there? I don't get it. And then also there were, this wasn't something I had to shop for, but there were going to have to be modifications done in the software that came with the toaster because there were just some elements in the equation that were missing. Then the next step was sort of a personnel search. And admittedly, it wasn't exhaustive because I didn't have a lot of time. But up in San Francisco, there, I don't know what it's like down here, but there isn't a very large Amiga community up there. So the not very exhaustive personnel search, but still one aided by people who were sort of in the know and in the area, and NewTek, had their suggestions for people. I didn't turn up hardly anybody. The most valuable thing for me to have that I never got would have been somebody just to manage the system, just to fix hard disks when they crashed, and as I will relate to you later, this happened with great regularity. Or just, to know more about the system than I did, because I was learning all these little, like hidden, it was kind of like being in the mysteries or something like that. You had to learn all this very esoteric stuff, like being a Freemason, secret handshakes, and all this other stuff to get the machine to work properly. I must have worked on it for 2 weeks before I realized that it's got 2 different operating systems, and so like, well, gee, I saved this file, but now I can't find it anywhere. And they say, oh, well, that's because you didn't iconize it, that's for the workbench, and there's the CLI and all this other just, caca that I had to deal with. Somebody else I wish just would have taken that off my mind, but that never happened, so I wound up being the systems manager as well in the long run. I did manage to find somebody to help me do some models. His name was Till Kruger, and he got recommended to me through a very sort of circuitous route that really didn't have anything to do with Amiga. Somebody at Autodesk recommended him, and I don't think there's an Amiga in the entire building. So he did some models for me, and that was the extent of the extra personnel, except for the normal people that I have around me to help me, just like do errands and make phone calls and stuff. I had to collect other resources. For instance, I had to first capture the soundtrack. For this, I used the Macintosh and DigiDesign hardware. I took a DAT copy of the soundtrack, which also, by the way, had to be edited for for release purposes, but also had to be edited for purposes of the video, because if it was unedited, then I would be in there rendering for another 2 weeks, trying to fill in that extra 2 minutes worth of music. So so it was edited down to 4 minutes. The digital version was edited down, and from then until the final assembly, the soundtrack actually resided on hard disk. So there was no tape involved in the intermediate stages. And there was the tools that came with the digital design hardware allow me to do something that's crucial, but that nobody provides for in any software that I've ever seen so far, and that's to provide a hit list for the entire thing that's locked to empty. In other words, the software gives you a graphical representation of the waveform of the whole song. And you can go through there and find musical events throughout the whole thing and form an event list of all of them, and it'll tell you the SMPTE time start and the duration of it, and it'll also tell you some irrelevant information that has only to do with tapeless sound editing and nothing to do with video production. So essentially I used that to build my hit list, and then went into Microsoft Word and then built myself a little document where I could enter all this and other information that I needed as well. And then I had to go into Microsoft Word and build myself a little document that was a script that included information about the cast and the action in the scene and various other things. So I had to sort of build all of these project management things from scratch using other things. Let me see now. The video. I had to, one of the prescribed things about this. Are you only going to do that while I'm talking? One of the things that had to be in the video was that my face had to be in it, since Warner Brothers was paying for it, and it is ultimately to be used, whatever my high-minded artistic things would be, it was ultimately going to be used for promotional purposes. So I had to appear singing in the song, or else I was sure the reaction would not be favorable. So so I had to have an original video source, and essentially all I did was I went into a little room in my house, and I set up an SVHS recorder and a camera, fairly high quality, but still consumer model, and I played back through the computer from the digitized version the song, and I just sang it maybe like 8 times in a row to the camera. Just a headshot from here up, because I knew that was all that would appear in the video. And I put that on a VHS tape and just put that away, and that came out like later on in the process. Then I had to do some 2D preparation as well, and for that I used primarily the Macintosh. I didn't find 3D tools or tools that had a high enough resolution to give me the images that I wanted to use to map in the final video. So I used Photoshop principally for that process. I would scan in using whatever scanner software was available for that particular scanner, and then retouch and crop and resample the images and treat them variously using Photoshop, and then transfer them over using other bizarre solutions. There was a hardware-software product that allowed you to hook up a Macintosh floppy disk drive to an Amiga and be able to read Macintosh formatted floppy disks and convert them into the Amiga. So in order to get my 2D stuff over, that's what I had to do. I would have to put them on floppy disks. It turned out to be the quickest way. I'd put them on floppy disks and move them over to the Amiga. Then after doing this for a little while, I realized that after doing a few more sort of like tests, renders, and seeing the number of scenes and complexity of scenes that the script was starting to have in it, I realized I had to do a recalculation of my rendering resources. So I added 4 more toasters and Amigas, and that brought the total up to 10. I thought it's just a nice round number, it makes the arithmetic easy. And so I decided that I would do the project with 10 Amigas. I had to buy more memory. They all came with 5 megs of memory, and they could hold 7 megs without additional special cards or anything. They could hold them on the SCSI card. So I bought more hardware, spent more money. Then I was ready to go into production. The design wasn't fully completed because I was still doing all of these other jobs, like trying to supervise the modeler, trying to get the hardware all put together, actually, physically taking apart 10 Amigas and plugging the boards in and populating 10 SCSI cards with 2 megs of memory each, and doing all the stuff that you usually hire somebody to do. But this all started happening right around the holidays, which made things all worse. So we went right into the production. When I say we, I mean me. I went into the production phase on Christmas Eve. And what that entailed was I rented a Sony LVR 5000 single frame write once video recorder, which would be the video source and also would be where the final video would be laid down to. I rented that, and I rented a time-based corrector because I needed it to get the SVHS video onto the single frame recorder. And as it turned out, I also needed it to filter out something that came out of the LVR before it went into the toaster. So, so I started this on Christmas Eve. Was the starting date for this particular phase of the project. Digitizing the video took 5 days. I digitized the video at 15 frames a second rather than 30 frames a second because, first of all, it took up half the space, and also because it took 5 days. It took something over, it took maybe 80 seconds or something like that to process a single frame. The toaster would, actually was an AREX program, which is Amiga's version of Rex, that was controlling both the video toaster and the DiaQuest controller that was running the LVR, and it would first it would tell the LVR to bring up such and such a frame, which would be fed into the input of the video toaster, and then would say to the video toaster, okay, digitize this frame, and then that would take some 80 seconds for it to digitize and save the frame. That took 5 days, and it filled up 9 335 megabyte hard drives. And essentially, this all took place on my dining room table. This was possible because I have this special arrangement with my family that I only celebrate Christmas every other year. And so they all went away, and I stayed home with the machines, essentially just digitized for 5 days straight. This also introduced some tricky other elements into the whole process because I was digitizing every other frame of video, which meant that every frame of video would be used twice in the final rendered frames. I didn't think of it at the time that I was doing the script, but I just did it literally where I broke my scenes up literally where I thought the musical hits were. And some scenes came out even and some scenes came out odd. And I just thought, oh, this is just a consequence. It just didn't dawn on me that I should have just made all the scenes even, and just stolen a frame here and a frame there, and nobody would have known the difference. Because then it would have eliminated all this sort of this vague thing that happens when you cross between frames that have odd numbers. Then you have to have a frame that goes twice. It goes once at the end of the last scene and once at the beginning of the next scene. So you have to have 2 copies of it. When I first got into the rendering, I was looking at my numbers and I said, wait a minute, I have more frames than I actually need, and I had to go through the whole thing, mathematically do this, renumber all the frames. We had to write programs to renumber the frames. That's 3,600 frames of video that all had to be renumbered and put into folders according to scene so that the renderer would know where to find them, and just a whole lot of logistical junk that you would usually hire somebody else to do. There was just nobody around to do it because the hardware was so new and the software was so new, and because I just, I was stupid enough to do it. So then after that was done, after these drives were all filled up, the files actually had to be converted to RGB files so they could be used in the renderer. They were, at that point, they were digitized video frame stores that were made to be loaded into the toaster really quick, but they were unsuitable for rendering. So that process didn't take 5 days because that could be done in parallel. I could start up a bunch of machines and have them render or convert a bunch of frames. So then came the nightmare. I mean, I knew nightmares would start. I just wasn't exactly sure where they would occur. The nightmare started at sort of the most basic of all places, that was backup. And this is why nobody should ask me what I think of the Amiga, because I spent almost as much time as I did sort of designing and managing the thing. I spent recovering crashed disks during the course of this. The only practical backup solution was, and I used all this Amiga SCSI thing and Amiga SCSI tools and all the other stuff formatted disks using all of the Amiga tools, you know, all supposedly successfully formatted according to the Amiga. And the only practical backup storage that I had was a 600 megabyte magneto-optical disk storage system, SCSI device that normally was being used on the Macintosh, but the disks formatted easily into Amiga drives. As a matter of fact, the large drives that I used that I didn't really have as many problems with were also sold as Macintosh drives, and the low-level formatting was Macintosh. And you could simply high-level format them and they would work fine with the Amiga. But there is something wrong with the Amiga operating system. I hate to inform you, but when you get into one of these great kind of volume things, you know, where you're moving many, many megabytes of files across, like for instance, when a frame is done, it might be 200 frames, each is 3/4 of a megabyte, so you've got some 130 megabytes of data to move across, which you want to happen in a single seamless, painless operation, and which would invariably crash somewhere in the middle of it. And worse than that, because of the, worse than just the plain old crash, the inability to complete the operation, the Amiga would always do something ridiculous like create a file header that could not be deleted without crashing the machine as well. So then I would have all of these like fragmentary bits of crap laying around on the disk that that couldn't be erased, you know, that couldn't be marked as bad blocks. It couldn't be done, you couldn't do anything with it. It was just this stupid file that was on there that that was just going to be there until you completely reformatted the drive. So so this happened a lot, you know, and the various crashes would be either sort of like less painless. In other words, it would hang, and then maybe I would be able to get started, and I might be able to delete the file, and things would continue more or less painlessly. And then other ones would require me to futz around anyway for a half an hour to an hour to try and recover the contents of the drive, because to do otherwise meant maybe the machine is running for days after that to recover the work that's lost. And indeed, there were instances where that happened. So anyway, that was a giant, huge headache, the biggest headache of the whole process, really. Rendering in earnest began on New Year's Eve, essentially a week after the, actually it began New Year's Day. I did a test scene a couple days before New Year's Eve, and then went off to play a gig somewhere, and then came back and to see what the results of the test scene were. And then rendering began in earnest. I started bringing the machines up, and it took maybe a week to get 9 of the machines going. At first there might have been 2 or 3. Some of the scenes still had designs that had to be worked out on them. There was the problem of crashing while I was trying to move information about. There was the problem of renumbering files and recovering bits here and there. But finally, after a week, I got 9 machines up and running. I felt really satisfied, and it looked like it was possible that I was going to finish close to what I thought my deadline was, which was more than a week after Warner Brothers' deadline. So I thought I might finish like by the 21st of January, which was what I was shooting for. So then things started to crop up, the things that people discourage you from doing these kind of projects, the things that they've experienced before. One of the first things that we encountered was renderer errors, or bugs in the renderer. And some of these were, particularly painful because the renderer might go along for days before you would discover what was going wrong. The renderer had a bug in the shadow routine. And I was using essentially like beta software. So a lot of this stuff is all different. Anybody that's got a toaster won't experience it. But for me, I was using software that was still evolving in a way. And one of the things was that shadows would sort of disintegrate as the object went along. And shadow scenes took longer they involved some degree of ray tracing, so they took a lot longer than regular scenes to render. So it would take a lot longer for you to find out that the shadows were disintegrating. So I would waste days before I even discovered the flaw, and then the fix was relatively quick in coming. But it would take a little while to discover the error. And there were 1 or 2 other errors, like an object that was supposed to be transparent, a certain part of the machine, of the scene refused to go transparent. So we would have to track down these bugs, and they would cause the scenes to have to be re-rendered. Then there would be flaws in the design of the scene itself that might show up, some of which might be actual real design flaws like collisions, where you'd have two objects that intersect the same space. Then again, they might be byproducts of the way the renderer works, of the scanline algorithm in the renderer. Whereas if you use an object that's longer than it is wide, and you give it certain surface attributes, that suddenly it doesn't appear the way you think it should, so you have to redesign the object sort of arbitrarily different way, break it up into a lot of little pieces, crap like that, and that wouldn't show up until like things had gone on rendering for a while, and so that would cause the loss of scenes that have and necessitate scenes being re-rendered again, things like that. There was a problem with memory in some of the scenes, and the culprit, it was hard to tell who the culprit was in some instances. Hard to tell whether it was the renderer, hard to tell whether it was the frame buffer. The ultimate upshot was that it might go along under tight memory conditions, and if you did the proper amount of tweaking here and there, you might be able to get it to render the scene, but then you would go after, had gone for maybe 3 days rendering the scene and look on the disk, and there wouldn't be a single frame saved to the disk. It rendered them, but it wouldn't save them. So we had other bugs like this, that appeared. Needless to say, my January 21st deadline came and went. I pushed it off by a week. I figured, well, I'll try and make it like a week late. So I said, okay, the 28th, I'm going to go in and finish this. And I booked post-production time, and I said I absolutely have to be done. And it looked like it was possible I would get done. Some other time savers and things that I've been waiting for certain scenes, special custom things that were in the renderer got done. And then it looked like I was going to get it finished. It didn't get finished a week later. No, it was still rendering, still some problems here and there. About 2 weeks before the post-production was supposed to start, I got the single frame recorder back. It was rented. It's at like a $20,000 item or something like that, so I didn't own it, or I didn't buy it for the project. I got that back, started doing some test renders, and although the picture quality coming out of the toaster looked fine, when it was going down on the disk, it didn't look good. There was all kinds of color smearing and stuff going all over the place, and this was another thing that caused some scenes to be re-rendered. The video toaster is composite only. There's no RGB output on it, so when you go into a device that accepts a composite input, yet sometimes you are encoding and decoding the signal many times before it ultimately winds up on the storage medium and gets degraded more and more. And so so that was a problem, and a problem that won't be a problem in the future, because there will be D2 output available directly if you happen to have access to a D2 machine, which will be another separate problem. So some scenes had to be re-rendered because of oversaturation of the colors, purely technical NTSC type thing that would just look too ugly. So I had to do some of them over, and there were other things related to that. For instance, a phenomenon that I noticed was that the keyframer in the package occupied maybe half of the screen area, if that. And so when you were keyframing objects and you got sort of a real-time playback on it, you seem to have a sort of, the relative motion of things would seem to have the pace that you wanted. But when the things are rendered full screen, they're covering a lot larger distance, twice the distance in some instances that they do in the keyframer. So suddenly everything's moving really fast and wild, like things you don't expect. So one or two scenes had to be, and even scenes that had yet to be designed, where sort of the pace of them was slowed down to compensate for what essentially was an illusion that the different scale that the keyframer introduced into the whole thing. In any case, at that point, I was getting really frantic about the final quality of the product because it didn't look that good on the LVR, and I was fretting over it. And NewTek sent out somebody who knew much more about the nuts and bolts of the back end of video than I did. And they came out, and we tried all kinds of things. We tried covering everything with tin foil, moving it to every corner of the room, and breaking the grounding pins off all the cables and all this other crap, and just general, Monte Carlo approach to trying to improve the picture. And then by accident, we discovered that the picture quality was far better when you ran the LVR in reverse than when you ran it forward. and never figured out exactly why that was. It may have something to do with the fact that the composite through thing and that the decoder was having trouble with it in one direction and not in the other. I don't know. But so we devised a method by which we would lay down all the frames in reverse order. And then when we got to the final transfer to where we transferred the contents of the LVR to D2 for the final assembly, then we ran them in reverse. And then also other like speed enhancements happened. When the method that the toaster first had to transfer a picture was something like took maybe 14 seconds to do a frame. So for me to transfer to get a whole scene out that was 30 frames long, it might take 5 minutes or something like that for a second's worth of final video. And the guy who came out from NewTek got this brainstorm about how to do it, and we reduced the time down to 6 seconds. So it was a significant reduction in the frame print time onto the LVR. So that allowed me to get a little bit more feedback and also to complete the project at all. So finally, I've sort of drifted past what was supposed to be the post-production date, and I'm putting it off a day at a time, and I have a final deadline, not even because Warner Brothers has given me the deadline, but because I have to go and work with a Japanese artist in New York, who's coming from Japan, and I can't put him off. So I have to be done. So I book it for essentially about 12 hours. Book the session for about 12 hours before my flight is supposed to leave. And I say, whatever isn't done in terms of rendering, I'll have to make up somehow in the studio. And even the day that the session is supposed to happen, I booked the session for the post-production session for like 2 a.m. in the afternoon, and I show up there at 6. And and all the way up until just getting in the car, loading all the equipment in the car to go there, I'm I'm laying down the last frames. The last frames are going down, all the way to, it's only, I would have been doing it in the car on the way, if it would have been possible. And as a matter of fact, I discovered that one scene had 15 frames missing that I just couldn't find anywhere. I looked on all the devices, I couldn't find them anywhere. And so I figured, I don't know what the hell I'm going to do. I loaded one of the Amigas and the toasters in the car, and I thought, okay, well, while he's assembling it, I'm going to have this Amiga rendering those last 15 frames, and they're going to go on the tape, to kind of just at the point that they're done doing the assembly here. Fortunately, I didn't have to do that, and I'll explain why in a minute. But the actual series of events was I blew in with all this equipment. I had the Macintosh. The Macintosh still had the original digital sound on hard disk, which was the sound source. And I had the LVR recorder because they didn't have one there. And essentially, we were going to dump the sound from the Macintosh onto D2 tape, and that would be the soundtrack. And then we would dump the video onto D2, and then essentially we would assemble it all. Now, there was one thing that I never checked, or had a way to check, before we did the final assembly. After all of these weeks and months of work, was whether the mouth was actually in sync with the music. I didn't know that, and wasn't to know that until we went into post-production to actually assemble the final product. The reason why is because the LVR recorder is a write once thing, and the sound is write once as well. So when you're laying down video a frame at a time, there's no way to lay down sound a 1/30th of a second at a time. So all of the video was silenced. All of the video scenes that got laid down, there was no way to tell whether they were actually in sync. I could look at it and say, well, it looks like I'm singing the right words in this place, but I'm not absolutely sure. So this was like a terrifying moment when the final assembly came. We discovered one or two other problems. One was that I hadn't recorded, there was no what they call handles in the business. There was no extra frames anywhere. I didn't record extra frames at the beginning and ends of the scene. I calculated them to be exactly, this is exactly how long it's going to be. There's going to be exactly this many frames. And everybody tells you not to do that, and I advise you not to do that, but that's what I did. I had the scenes made down to the exact number of frames. So one thing we discovered was that there was this, for some reason there was this white flash that happened at the top of the screen every time it crossed from the sort of pre-recorded black that was on the write once disc and the new video that we put on there, and they couldn't get rid of it no matter what they did, except if I manually recorded a frame of black right before the video scene happened. So I had to sit there for about a half an hour with the manual programmer for the LVR and program a frame of black, frame of black, frame of black for 47 scenes for the whole thing before we could actually lay it across. So we did that. That was the final sort of headache. And then the most blissful part of it actually was putting it together, because it was like everything was more or less done. It was just like putting a jigsaw puzzle together. And we started assembling it, and we got to the fourth scene, and that was the scene that was missing the 15 frames. And I said, what am I going to do? I'm missing 15 frames. Help me. And as it turns out, with the new generation of recorders, digital recorders, and the D2 recorder, you can stretch time infinitely. You don't have to do it to some factor of the original frame rate. And they added the 15 frames, and since I wasn't actually singing the words yet, you didn't notice that time had been stretched, and it worked out perfectly. So the biggest problem was essentially solved by state-of-the-art video technology. You know, that sort of saved my ass in the final hours there. I had one or two other problems that were fixed similarly by little video tricks. I had one frame that had that was a faulty frame, and about the bottom third of it was just black. Something had happened, and so we grabbed a piece from the previous frame or the next frame and just like put it in there, and it went by. You never even noticed the difference. And then in another scene, we had texture aliasing, which you don't notice when you're doing still frames, but when things start moving, then you have, if you have something like a water-type texture, as it proceeds off towards the horizon and it gets busier and busier and busier, then you just get this, essentially what's noise along the horizon. So we use sort of digital blurring and matting using real-time digital video techniques, and that's eliminated or at least minimized that anti-aliasing. So real-time video came through in the end to fix a lot of this stuff. And it went pretty much as planned. We started actually assembling maybe like by 7 o'clock, and we were finished by 11. We made a couple of time adjustments, but praise the Lord, the voice was in sync throughout pretty much. And the only other problem was that the reference copy they gave me and the master copy that they finally sent to Warner Brothers to be duplicated had the sound out of phase for some reason, you know, which was something they did. They repaired that fairly easily. So that was on essentially the 31st of January at 11 p.m. I completed the project, completed my part of the project. I went to Warner Brothers by courier that evening. And by like 9 a.m. the next day, they started duplicating it and sending it out. They walked it into VH1 the final Monday, and they added it the Monday following that Friday, and they added it to the VH1 playlist on that Monday. And when they called me and informed me of that, I realized that exactly a week earlier, I'd been pulling my hair out, saying to myself, I have made the biggest mistake. I should just like move to Alaska, you know, and just like and never show my face again, you know, because this is never going to be finished. So just by, you know, some, you know, karmic dividend, I managed to get the thing finished, and a week later it was accepted on VH1. And that essentially is the making of. Thanks.
To order your video copy of, Todd, Amiga Pros Respond to Rundgren's Adventures in Amiga Land, send check or money order for $19.95 plus $4 shipping and handling to Sweet Pea Productions, Post Office Box 912, Topanga, California 90290, or call toll-free 800-235-4922 with your Visa or MasterCard number ready.